The garden path cracked under Duke Alastair Ravensworth's boot, and then his knees buckled without warning. He did not stumble like a man losing his footing. He dropped hard onto the gravel, his head turning just enough to miss the stone edging by inches. For a moment the garden went silent except for the wind moving through the hedges. Lady Seraphina Voss was 3 steps behind him, laughing at something he had said only a moment before. The laughter died in her throat. She rushed forward, her skirts catching on a rose bush, and knelt beside him. "Alastair, Alastair, can you hear me?" He did not answer. His eyes were closed, his face slack, his breathing slow and even. To anyone watching, he looked like a man who had suffered a sudden collapse, the kind that comes without cause and without mercy. But inside, Alastair was awake. Every part of him was awake. He had planned this moment for 11 days, rehearsing the fall in his mind until he could perform it without hesitation. He had studied how a man breathes when he is truly unconscious, how his limbs go heavy, how his eyelids do not flutter no matter how much noise surrounds him. He had practiced holding his breath just long enough to slow his pulse, then releasing it in a long, quiet exhale that would fool even a physician's hand pressed to his wrist. He needed to know the truth about the woman kneeling over him now. He needed to know if Seraphina loved him, or if she loved what his name and his fortune could give her. The rumors had reached him slowly, the way smoke reaches a room before anyone notices the fire. A letter left carelessly on a writing desk. A conversation between 2 housemaids that stopped the instant he entered a hallway. A cousin's offhand remark at a dinner party, spoken with a smile that did not match her words. Each piece alone meant nothing. Together, they formed a shape he did not want to see. So he had decided to test her the only way he could think of, a way that left no room for polished answers or rehearsed affection. He would become invisible while still being present. He would disappear behind closed eyes and listen to what she said when she believed no one could hear. "Someone help me, please, he has collapsed," Seraphina called out, her voice sharp with alarm. Within moments the garden filled with movement. A footman came running from the stable path. 2 housemaids appeared at the terrace door, hands pressed to their mouths. The butler, a steady man named Henry who had served the Ravensworth family for over 20 years, arrived last, moving quickly despite his age, already calling for the physician to be summoned from the village. They lifted Alastair carefully, 4 sets of hands beneath his shoulders and legs, and carried him through the garden doors and up the wide staircase to his private chambers. Seraphina walked beside him the entire way, gripping his hand, murmuring words of comfort that he could not answer. Inside, he felt every movement of the journey, the slight sway as they turned a corner, the cool air of the hallway, the warmth of the fire already burning in his room, kept lit even in the mild afternoon because the old house held a chill in its stone walls no matter the season. They laid him on the bed, and someone drew the heavy curtains halfway closed, dimming the room to a soft gray light. "Fetch Dr. Bennet at once," Henry ordered. "Tell him it is urgent." Seraphina did not leave the bedside. She sat in the chair beside him, still holding his hand, and Alastair felt the tremble in her fingers. For a moment, doubt crept into his plan. Perhaps he was wrong. Perhaps the rumors were nothing more than jealous gossip from people who wished to see the engagement fail. Then he heard her whisper something under her breath, so quiet that even he almost missed it. "Not yet, not like this." The words meant nothing on their own, but the tone behind them chilled him. It was not the voice of a woman frightened for her beloved's life. It was the voice of someone whose plans had been interrupted. He kept his breathing slow and steady, his face empty of any reaction, though his mind raced through every possible meaning of those 4 words. Dr. Bennet arrived within the half-hour, a thin man with spectacles and quick, careful hands. He checked Alastair's pulse, lifted his eyelids to examine his eyes, and pressed gentle fingers along his skull searching for injury. "There is no wound from the fall," the doctor said, half to himself. His pulse is steady, though slower than I would expect. Has he complained of headaches recently? Fatigue? Any trouble with his breathing? No, nothing, Serafina answered quickly. He seemed perfectly well only moments before it happened. We were walking in the garden and he simply fell. The doctor frowned, pressing 2 fingers to Alistair's wrist again, counting silently. Alistair focused every ounce of his concentration on keeping his heartbeat calm, though the weight of the doctor's attention made his chest tighten with the effort of appearing untroubled. It may be a fainting spell brought on by exhaustion, Dr. Bennett finally said. Some men of his position push themselves too hard without realizing the toll it takes. I recommend rest, quiet, and no visitors beyond close family until he wakes on his own. I will return this evening to check on his condition. Should we not wake him now? Serafina asked. Surely there is something that can be done. It is best not to force it, the doctor replied. The body knows how to heal itself if given the chance. Disturbing him now could do more harm than good. Alistair silently thanked the doctor for words he could not have scripted better himself. Rest. Quiet. No visitors beyond close family. It was exactly the isolation he needed to observe Serafina without interference. The doctor gathered his bag and left instructions with Henry before departing. The room slowly emptied as the household returned to its duties, though the news of the Duke's collapse spread through every corridor and servants' quarter within the hour. Only Serafina remained, along with, for a brief moment, a young housemaid named Elsie who came to check the fire and bring a fresh pitcher of water. Elsie was 17, new to the household by only 4 months, quiet by nature and quick with her hands. She had been assigned to the upper floor rooms because Mrs. Whitfield, the housekeeper, trusted her to be careful and discreet. She moved about the room without drawing attention, adjusting the fire screen, setting the water pitcher on the side table, and casting only the briefest glance toward the bed where the Duke lay motionless. She noticed something odd in that glance, though she could not yet name it. The Duke's hand, resting at his side, seemed too relaxed, too deliberately placed, as though someone had arranged it rather than let it fall naturally. She thought little of it at the time, dismissing the thought as nerves brought on by the shock of seeing her employer so still and pale. "Shall I bring anything else, my lady?" Elsie asked softly. "No, that will be all," Serafina answered without turning her head, her eyes fixed on Alistair's face. "You may go." Elsie curtsied and left the room, closing the door with the gentlest click she could manage, leaving Serafina alone with the man she believed could not hear a single word she said. For a long moment, Serafina said nothing at all. She simply watched him, her expression unreadable in the dim firelight. Alistair waited, every nerve stretched tight, wondering what she would do now that she believed herself unobserved. Finally, she leaned closer, her lips near his ear, and spoke in a voice so low it barely stirred the air between them. "You could not have chosen a worse time to fall ill," she whispered. "There is so much left to settle before the wedding, and now everything must wait." It was an odd thing to say to a man she believed might be gravely unwell, not fear for his health, not worry over his suffering, only frustration that his collapse had interrupted something she considered important. Alistair kept his face still, though inside, something cold settled into his chest. He had hoped, even now, that he would hear only love and worry from her lips. Instead, he heard the voice of someone calculating, someone measuring his collapse against a schedule only she understood. She sat back in the chair again, folding her hands in her lap, and for a while the room held only the crackle of the fire and the soft ticking of the clock on the mantel. Alistair used the silence to steady his own thoughts, reminding himself that he had only heard 4 sentences. It was not enough to condemn her. Not yet. He needed more. He needed to see what she would do, who she would speak to, and whether her true feelings would reveal themselves in full once. She believed the danger of discovery had passed entirely. He did not have to wait long. A soft knock came at the door, and Serafina rose to answer it. Alastair heard hushed voices in the doorway, one belonging to Seraphina, the other to a woman he recognized after a moment as Charlotte, Seraphina's closest friend and frequent companion at social gatherings. "How is he?" Charlotte asked quietly. "The same," Seraphina said. "The doctor says he will wake when his body is ready, and until then there is nothing to do but wait." "And Nathaniel?" Charlotte asked, her voice dropping even lower, as though she feared the walls themselves might repeat her words. "Have you sent word to him about the delay?" Alastair's heart, which he had worked so hard to keep slow and steady, gave a single hard beat that he prayed neither woman noticed. Nathaniel. The name meant nothing to him directly, yet it struck him with the force of a blow he had not braced for. He had never heard Seraphina mention any man by that name, not once in the 8 months of their engagement. "Not yet," Seraphina answered. "I will send a message once I know more. This changes nothing between us, only the timing." "You should be careful," Charlotte warned. "If anyone were to discover the arrangement before the wedding takes place, the consequences would fall on you far harder than on him." "I know the risk," Seraphina said. "I have always known it, but some things are worth the risk, Charlotte. You know that better than anyone." The two women lowered their voices further, and though Alastair strained to catch more, the words blurred into an indistinct murmur before the door closed softly, and Charlotte's footsteps faded down the corridor. Seraphina returned to the chair beside the bed, and for the remainder of the afternoon she said nothing more of consequence, only small comments about the fire needing tending or the light growing dim behind the curtains. But the damage of what Alastair had already heard could not be undone. An arrangement. A man named Nathaniel. A risk she claimed was worth taking. He lay there in the gathering dusk, his eyes closed, his breathing slow, playing the part of a man untouched by the world around him, while inside, a storm of questions built with no answer in sight. Who was Nathaniel? What arrangement bound them together? And how much of what he believed about his own engagement had been built on nothing more than careful performance, no different from the one he himself was giving now, lying still upon the bed, testing the woman he had once been certain he loved. Outside the window, the sun continued its slow fall toward the horizon, painting the curtains in shades of orange and gray, and somewhere below, in the servants' quarters, Elsie set down her evening tasks and found herself thinking, without quite knowing why, about the strange stillness of the Duke's hand resting on the blanket, and the odd feeling that something in that room was not entirely as it appeared to be. Night settled over Ravensworth Manor, and with it came a stillness that made every small sound feel enormous. The clock on the mantel ticked with a patience that seemed almost cruel to Alastair, who had not moved from his position on the bed for hours. His muscles ached from holding themselves in careful stillness, yet he dared not shift even slightly, for Seraphina had not left the room since the encounter with Charlotte at the door. She sat in the chair beside him now with a book open on her lap, though she had not turned a page in a long while. Her eyes drifted often toward his face, studying it the way one studies a locked door, searching for some sign of what lay behind it. Dr. Bennet returned as promised in the evening, checking Alastair's pulse once more, listening to his breathing with an ear pressed close to his chest, and pronouncing him unchanged but stable. "These things sometimes take days to resolve," the doctor said, closing his bag. "I have seen men sleep like this for a week and wake with no memory of falling ill at all. Keep him warm, keep the room quiet, and send for me immediately if his breathing changes or if he shows any sign of fever." "Days," Seraphina repeated, and something in her voice carried a weight Alastair could not quite name. Not despair, not relief, something closer to calculation, as though she were rearranging plans in her mind to account for a delay she had not expected. The doctor left, and Henry appeared briefly to ask if Seraphina required anything for the night, offering to have a bed prepared for her in the adjoining chamber, so she would not need to leave the Duke's side. "That will not be necessary," Seraphina said. "I will stay here in the chair. I could not rest anywhere else while he lies like this." Alistair felt a small, unwelcome flicker of warmth at those words, a reminder of why he had fallen for her in the first place. She had always known how to say the right thing, how to arrange her voice into something tender and devoted. He forced himself to remember the whispered conversation with Charlotte. An arrangement. A man named Nathaniel. Words did not always match actions, and he intended to see which of the two told the truth. The household grew quiet as the hours passed. Somewhere below, pots and pans clattered softly as the kitchen staff finished their evening work, and eventually even those sounds faded into silence. Alistair listened to Seraphina's breathing slow beside him, and for a while he wondered if she had fallen asleep in the chair. Then near midnight she rose. He heard the soft rustle of her skirts, the careful placement of her footsteps as she crossed the room, pausing at the door to listen for any sound in the hallway before opening it just enough to slip through. The door closed behind her with barely a whisper of sound. Alistair's eyes remained closed, but his mind opened fully now, calculating, wondering. He could not follow her without abandoning the very disguise he had built so carefully. He was trapped in his own performance, forced to remain still while the answers he sought walked away down the corridor without him. It was nearly 20 minutes before he heard the door open again. Seraphina returned, moving more quickly than before, and this time she was not alone. A second set of footsteps entered the room, lighter, quicker, and then the door clicked shut once more. "You should not have come here," Seraphina whispered, her voice tight with something between fear and urgency. "If anyone sees you in this part of the house, there will be no explaining it away." "I had no choice," a man's voice answered, low and hurried. "Your message said it was urgent. What has happened? Is he truly ill, or is this some trick of yours to buy more time?" Alistair's entire body went rigid beneath the blankets, though he forced his breathing to remain slow, deliberate, unchanged. This was Nathaniel. He was certain of it. The voice was unfamiliar, cultured but edged with impatience, the voice of a man accustomed to being obeyed rather than questioned. "He collapsed in the garden this afternoon," Seraphina said. "The doctor says it could be days before he wakes, if he wakes at all in the way he was before. I do not know what to make of it, Nathaniel. This changes everything we planned." There it was. His name, spoken clearly now, confirming what Alistair had already suspected. He kept his face slack, his eyes closed, though his mind screamed with questions he could not yet ask aloud. "It changes nothing if we are careful," Nathaniel replied. "If he does not recover, the estate passes according to the arrangements already made. If he does recover, we simply proceed as planned, and he never needs to know how close we came to losing everything. And if he wakes and remembers something, if he heard anything while lying here—" "Unconscious men remember nothing, Seraphina. You know this as well as I do. Stop worrying yourself into mistakes. We are so close now. Do not let fear undo months of careful work." Alistair felt something inside him harden into cold, quiet fury, though outwardly he remained a statue upon the bed. Months of careful work. What work had they been doing together, and for how long had it been happening beneath his own roof, behind his own back, while he believed himself loved and cherished by the woman he intended to marry? "What of the maid?" Nathaniel asked suddenly, his voice sharper. "The one who tends this room, does she suspect anything?" Alistair's attention sharpened at the mention of a maid. He thought immediately of Elsie, the quiet young woman who had brought water and tended the fire earlier that day. "She noticed nothing," Seraphina said, though there was a note of uncertainty in her voice. "She is only a servant. She sees what she is told to see and nothing more." "Let's see that it remains that way," Nathaniel said. "Servants talk more than you think, and gossip in a house this size travels faster than any of us would like. If she begins asking questions, or if she says anything to the housekeeper, we will need to address it before it becomes a problem." The word address carried a weight that made the fine hairs on Alistair's arms rise. though he could not say precisely why. It was not an overt threat, nothing so direct that he could name it as danger, yet the tone beneath the words unsettled him more than anything he had heard thus far. "I will speak with her," Serafina said. "There is no need for anything more than that." "Good," Nathaniel said. "Now listen carefully. We do not have much time before someone notices I am gone from my own quarters. The physician who examined him, does he suspect anything unusual about the collapse?" "No, he believes it to be exhaustion, nothing more." "Then we continue as we discussed. If he wakes within the week, we proceed with the wedding as planned, and everything moves forward exactly as we arranged. If he does not wake, or if his condition worsens, you know what must be done regarding the estate documents. Your uncle has already prepared everything on his end." Alastair's mind raced through the implications of every word. Estate documents, an uncle involved in preparations, a wedding proceeding forward regardless of outcome, as though his life itself were merely one variable among many in a plan built entirely around wealth and inheritance rather than affection or partnership. He wanted desperately to open his eyes, to rise from the bed and confront them both in that very moment, but he forced himself to remain still, reminding himself that half a plan revealed was worse than no plan at all. He needed the whole truth, not merely fragments overheard in darkness. If he revealed himself now, they would simply deny everything, construct new lies to replace the ones just spoken, and he would be left with nothing but suspicion and no proof at all. "You should go now," Serafina said, "before anyone wakes and finds you missing from your room." "Send word the moment anything changes," Nathaniel replied. "And Serafina, try to appear appropriately distressed when others are watching. It would not do for anyone to notice how calm you have remained through all of this." Alastair heard the door open and close once more as Nathaniel departed, his footsteps fading quickly down the corridor. Serafina remained standing near the door for a long moment, and when she finally returned to the chair beside the bed, her breathing had changed, quicker now, betraying an anxiety she had hidden well during the conversation just past. She sat in silence for a while, and then, in a voice so quiet it seemed meant only for herself, she whispered, "Forgive me, Alastair. I never wanted it to happen this way." The words might have moved him once, might have offered some small comfort that perhaps beneath the scheming there remained a fragment of genuine feeling. But Alastair had heard too much now to trust a single whispered apology. Forgiveness required truth, and truth had been entirely absent from every word she had spoken since kneeling over him in the garden that afternoon. Elsie, meanwhile, had not gone to bed at all. Her small room beneath the eaves sat directly above a portion of the servants' corridor that connected to the back stairwell, the very stairwell Nathaniel had used to reach the upper floor undetected. She had been unable to sleep, her mind still turning over the strange stillness she had noticed in the Duke's hand earlier that day, and so she had risen quietly to fetch a cup of water from the kitchen, moving through the darkened house with the practiced silence of someone accustomed to not being noticed. It was in the back corridor, near the base of the servants' stairwell, that she saw him, a man she did not recognize, dressed too finely to belong among the household staff, moving quickly and quietly toward the upper floor where the Duke's chambers lay. She pressed herself into the shadow of a doorway, holding her breath, watching him pass without turning to look her way. She recognized something in his direction of travel, and a cold unease settled into her stomach. He was heading toward the Duke's private wing, the very rooms where Lady Serafina now kept her vigil beside her unconscious fiancé. Elsie did not know what she had witnessed, only that it felt wrong in a way she could not yet explain, and that the strange stillness of the Duke's hand and the strange presence of this unfamiliar man in the dead of night were somehow woven together into a pattern she did not yet have the pieces to complete. She returned to her room without her water, sleep now entirely beyond her reach, and lay awake staring at the low ceiling above her bed, turning over every detail in her mind, wondering if she should tell someone what she had seen, and wondering, with a growing sense of dread, what exactly it was she had stumbled into within the walls of the great house she had only just begun to call home. Morning arrived pale and cold, the kind of light that made the manor's stone walls look gray rather than warm. Elsie rose before the rest of the household, as she always did, and went about her duties with a heaviness in her chest that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. She could not stop thinking about the man she had seen in the corridor the night before, nor about the strange feeling that had settled over her the previous afternoon in the Duke's chambers. She was assigned once again to the upper floor, carrying fresh linens and a tray of tea meant for Lady Seraphina, who had apparently refused to leave the Duke's bedside even for breakfast. Mrs. Whitfield, the housekeeper, had remarked with some admiration on the young lady's devotion, calling it a rare thing to see in women of her station, who often left such vigils to nurses and servants. Elsie said nothing in response, though privately she wondered if devotion was truly what she had witnessed, or something else entirely. She knocked softly at the chamber door and entered at Seraphina's quiet permission. The room looked much as it had the day before, curtains half drawn, fire burning low, the Duke lying motionless upon the bed. Seraphina sat in the same chair, though her eyes now carried the shadowed look of someone who had slept little, if at all. "Set the tray there," Seraphina said, gesturing toward the small table near the window, "and bring more wood for the fire. It has grown cold in here overnight." Elsie moved to obey, and as she crossed the room she allowed herself the briefest glance toward the bed. The Duke's chest rose and fell in slow, even breaths, and his face remained peaceful, untroubled. Yet something about the set of his jaw seemed different from the day before, tighter somehow, as though even in sleep, some part of him held tension it could not release. She busied herself with the fire, adding fresh wood and coaxing the flames back to a steady burn, all while listening carefully to the quiet room around her. Seraphina said nothing further, sipping at her tea with an air of distraction, her gaze fixed somewhere beyond the window rather than on the man she claimed to be watching over. It was as Elsie knelt by the hearth brushing ash from the stones that she noticed something odd reflected faintly in the small mirror hanging above the mantel. From her position, she could see a sliver of the bed behind her, and in that sliver she saw the Duke's eyes. They were open. Only slightly, only for the briefest moment, but open nonetheless, and fixed not on the ceiling above him but on Seraphina, watching her with an intensity that made Elsie's breath catch in her throat. Almost as quickly as she had seen it, his eyes closed again, and his face returned to its careful mask of peaceful unconsciousness. Elsie kept her own face turned toward the fire, her hands trembling slightly as she continued arranging the wood, her mind racing to make sense of what she had just witnessed. The Duke was awake. He had been awake, perhaps this entire time, watching and listening while everyone around him believed him lost to illness. She thought immediately of the man in the corridor the previous night, of Seraphina's strange whispered words she had not been meant to overhear the day before when Elsie had first tended the fire, and of the odd stillness in the Duke's hand that had troubled her from the very beginning. Pieces began arranging themselves into a shape she could barely comprehend. The Duke was not ill at all. He was pretending, and Lady Seraphina did not know it. But why? What could drive a man to deceive everyone around him, including the woman he intended to marry, into believing him unconscious and helpless? Elsie finished her task at the hearth and rose slowly, careful to keep her expression neutral, her movements unhurried. She gathered the empty water pitcher from the side table, preparing to excuse herself from the room, when Seraphina spoke unexpectedly. "You are the girl who has been tending this room, are you not? Elsie, I believe Mrs. Whitfield called you." "Yes, my lady," Elsie answered, keeping her eyes lowered respectfully. "How long have you served in this household?" 4 months, my lady." Seraphina studied her for a long moment, and Elsie felt the weight of that gaze settle uncomfortably upon her shoulders. She thought of the whispered conversation with the man called Nathaniel the night before, of the words she had not heard but could now imagine with dreadful clarity. Servants talk more than you think. See that it remains that way. You seem a careful girl, Serafina said finally. Quiet, attentive to your work. I try to serve well, my lady. Good, Serafina said, though something in her tone carried an edge Elsie could not quite identify, something between approval and warning. It is important in a house such as this to know which matters deserve one's attention and which are better left unremarked upon. Do you understand me? Elsie's heart began to beat faster, though she kept her expression carefully neutral. I believe I do, my lady. See that you remember it, Serafina said, turning her attention back to the window. That will be all for now. Elsie curtsied and left the room as quickly as propriety allowed, her mind spinning with everything she had witnessed and heard in the span of a single morning. She made her way down the back stairwell toward the kitchen, her thoughts a tangled knot of fear and confusion, uncertain whether she had just been given a simple instruction or a veiled threat. She found Mrs. Whitfield in the kitchen, overseeing the preparation of the midday meal, and for a moment Elsie considered telling her everything: the man in the corridor, the Duke's open eyes, Lady Serafina's strange warning. But something held her back, a caution she could not name, a sense that the matter was larger and more dangerous than she yet understood, and that speaking carelessly might place her in harm's way before she fully grasped what she had stumbled into. Instead, she busied herself with her morning tasks, carrying trays and folding linens with hands that would not quite stop trembling, her mind returning again and again to the image of the Duke's open eyes fixed upon his fiancée with such quiet, careful intensity. By mid-afternoon, she found herself once more assigned to the upper floor, this time to deliver a message from Mrs. Whitfield regarding arrangements for the evening meal, since Lady Serafina had insisted on taking all her meals within the Duke's chambers rather than leave his side. Elsie approached the door quietly, and finding it slightly ajar, she paused before knocking, uncertain whether to announce herself immediately. Through the gap in the door, she heard Lady Serafina's voice, low and urgent, speaking to someone Elsie could not see from her position in the hallway. He must wake soon, Serafina was saying. Every day this continues, the arrangement grows more precarious. My uncle grows impatient, and Nathaniel says the documents cannot wait indefinitely. There was no response, and Elsie realized with a start that Serafina was speaking not to another person but perhaps to herself, or worse, directly to the unconscious Duke, believing her words would never reach a mind capable of understanding them. You must forgive me eventually if you ever learn the truth of it, Serafina continued, her voice softening into something almost sorrowful. I did not choose this path easily. My family's debts grew too large to ignore, and when my uncle proposed the arrangement with Nathaniel, I believed I had no other choice but to accept it. Marrying you was meant to secure everything, to settle every debt and secure my family's future, and Nathaniel was meant to remain nothing more than a business partner in the arrangement. But feelings do not always follow the plans we make for them, Alistair, and somewhere along the way, what began as necessity became something else entirely. Elsie stood frozen in the hallway, one hand pressed against the doorframe, hardly daring to breathe. She understood now, with dreadful clarity, exactly what she had overheard the night before, and exactly what Lady Serafina's whispered words meant. The engagement, the wedding being planned with such apparent devotion, all of it rested upon debts and arrangements and a hidden affection for another man entirely. I know this makes me a poor excuse for the woman you believe you are marrying, Serafina went on, but I have tried in my own way to be kind to you, to make this arrangement bearable for us both, even knowing my heart belongs elsewhere. Perhaps that counts for something. Perhaps it counts for nothing at all. Inside the room, though Elsie could not see him, Alistair lay perfectly still, absorbing every word with a stillness that had nothing to do with performance and everything to do with genuine shock. He had suspected deception. He had not imagined the full weight of what lay beneath it, the debts, the arranged betrayal, the confession of feelings for another man spoken so openly to a figure Serafina believed incapable of hearing or understanding any of it. A part of him wanted to rise from the bed immediately, to confront her with everything he now knew, to demand an accounting for every lie she had told him over the past 8 months of their engagement. But a colder, more careful part of him recognized that he still did not possess everything he needed. He knew of Nathaniel, of debts, of an uncle involved in arranging the entire deception, but he did not yet know the full scope of what awaited him should he reveal his knowledge too soon. Documents needed to be found. Names needed to be confirmed. If he moved too quickly, he risked allowing Serafina and her collaborators the chance to cover their tracks, to destroy evidence, to construct new lies more difficult to unravel than the ones already exposed. Outside in the hallway, Elsie realized with sudden alarm that she had been standing motionless for far too long, and that if anyone found her there, listening at a barely open door, the consequences could prove severe indeed. She stepped back quietly, then knocked properly upon the door, waiting for Serafina's permission before entering with the message from Mrs. Whitfield regarding the evening meal. Serafina's composure had returned entirely by the time Elsie entered, her earlier vulnerability tucked away behind the same careful mask she wore in front of the rest of the household. She received the message with a distracted nod, instructing that meals continue to be brought to the chamber as before, and dismissed Elsie without further comment. That evening, as the household settled into its usual quiet rhythm, Elsie found herself unable to shake the weight of everything she had witnessed and overheard throughout the day. She understood now that she held knowledge dangerous enough to unravel an entire scheme, knowledge that placed her in a precarious position between a duke pretending to be unconscious and a fiancé pretending to be devoted, each unaware that a third party now understood far more than either of them realized. She lay awake that night turning the matter over in her mind, weighing the risk of silence against the risk of speaking, uncertain which path might protect her and which might place her in greater danger. The great house around her, usually a source of quiet comfort despite its unfamiliarity, now felt heavy with secrets pressing against its stone walls from every direction, and Elsie understood, with a growing sense of unease, that she had become far more entangled in the affairs of her employers than any servant ought to be, and that the choices she made in the coming days would matter far more than she had ever imagined when she first accepted her position within the household 4 short months before. 3 days passed in the same careful rhythm. Alastair remained in his bed, eyes closed, breathing slow, while the household continued to believe him trapped in some mysterious illness that Dr. Bennet could neither explain nor cure. Serafina kept her vigil beside him, alternating between whispered confessions meant only for a man she believed could not hear them, and brief, hushed conversations with Charlotte or, on one further occasion late at night, with Nathaniel himself, who slipped in and out of the manor through the servants' stairwell with practiced ease. Alastair had learned much in those 3 days. He now understood that Nathaniel was the younger son of a neighboring family, a man with expensive tastes and insufficient inheritance to support them, who had entered into an arrangement with Serafina's uncle years before Alastair had ever proposed marriage. He understood that Serafina's family carried debts large enough to threaten the loss of their own estate, and that marrying into the Ravensworth fortune had been proposed as the solution, with Nathaniel positioned to benefit indirectly through documents and arrangements Alastair had not yet fully uncovered. What troubled him most, more than the debts or the scheme itself, was the growing certainty that genuine feeling had developed between Serafina and Nathaniel somewhere within the machinery of their arrangement, a complication neither of them had planned for and neither seemed entirely able to control. He needed proof now, something beyond overheard whispers that could be denied or explained away should he confront them directly. Whispered words in a darkened room would mean nothing if Serafina simply claimed he had misunderstood, or that grief and confusion had distorted his memory of events during his illness. He needed documents, letters, something concrete enough to withstand denial. The opportunity came on the fourth night, when Alistair overheard Serafina mention, during another late whispered visit from Nathaniel, that certain papers remained hidden within a locked drawer in her personal writing desk, kept in the guest chamber she occupied during her extended stay at the manor while tending to his supposed illness. "Your uncle sent the final documents yesterday," Nathaniel said quietly during that visit. "They are with you now, are they not?" "Locked away safely," Serafina confirmed. "No one has any reason to search my chamber. They will remain hidden until we know what path we must take." Alistair filed this information away carefully, understanding now precisely where the proof he needed could be found, though he could not retrieve it himself without abandoning his disguise entirely. He needed help, someone trustworthy enough to search the chamber without raising suspicion, someone with legitimate reason to enter guest rooms as part of their daily duties. He thought immediately of the young maid, Elsie, who attended his room faithfully throughout his supposed illness, and whose brief flicker of alarm he had noticed on more than one occasion when their eyes had accidentally met during those unguarded moments when he allowed his true awareness to show through cracks in his performance. The following morning, Alistair made his decision. He would need to reveal himself, at least partially, to someone within the household, and Elsie seemed the only person positioned to help him without immediately alerting Serafina to his awakening. The opportunity arrived when Elsie entered his chamber alone in the early morning hours, before Serafina had risen from the adjoining room where she had finally begun sleeping in proper quarters rather than the chair beside his bed. Elsie moved quietly to tend the fire, as she had done every morning for the past 4 days, unaware that today would differ from all the mornings before it. "Elsie," Alistair said quietly, his eyes opening fully for the first time in her presence. She startled so severely she nearly dropped the poker in her hand, spinning to face the bed with wide, frightened eyes. For a moment she said nothing, simply staring at the Duke sitting upright now, very much awake, very much aware, watching her with an intensity that made her heart pound against her ribs. "Your Grace," she whispered finally, "I do not understand. Everyone believes you unconscious," the doctor said. "I am not ill," Alistair said, keeping his voice low, urgent. "I have not been ill for a single moment since I fell in the garden 4 days ago. I need you to understand this, and I need your help, though I recognize the danger I place you in by asking it." Elsie's mind raced backward through everything she had witnessed over the past several days. The open eyes reflected faintly in the mirror above the mantel, Serafina's whispered confessions, the strange man moving through the servants' corridor in the dead of night. Pieces that had refused to fit together suddenly clicked into a clear and troubling picture. "You have been listening," she said slowly. "This entire time you have heard everything Lady Serafina said, believing you could not understand her." "Everything," Alistair confirmed grimly. "And I believe you have witnessed more than you have told anyone, based on the way you carry yourself around this room, Elsie. I saw the fear in your eyes days ago, and I understand now it was fear born of knowledge rather than simple nerves." Elsie hesitated, torn between loyalty to her employer's confidence and the growing understanding that remaining silent might make her complicit in something far larger and more dangerous than she had originally believed. "I saw a man in the corridor 4 nights ago," she admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper, "moving toward this wing of the house, though I did not know who he was or why he had come. And yesterday I overheard Lady Serafina speaking to you directly, believing you could not hear her, saying things about debts and arrangements and a man named Nathaniel." "Then you already know more than most in this household," Alistair said, "and I need you to help me learn the rest. There are documents hidden in Lady Serafina's writing desk, in the guest chamber she occupies. Papers that would prove everything I have overheard these past days, proof strong enough that she cannot simply deny it when I finally reveal that I have been aware this entire time. Elsie's face paled further at the request. Your Grace, if I am discovered searching her private belongings, the consequences for me would be severe. Lady Seraphina has already warned me once, in words I understood clearly enough as a threat, to remember which matters deserve my attention and which do not. I understand the risk I am asking you to take, Alastair said, and I will not force you into it. But know this, Elsie. If this scheme succeeds, if Seraphina and her collaborator complete whatever plan they have arranged regarding my estate, the consequences will extend far beyond this household. And if you help me now, I promise you protection and reward far exceeding any risk you take on my behalf. I do not make such promises carelessly. Elsie stood silently for a long moment, weighing the Duke's words against her own fear, against the image of Lady Seraphina's cold warning from days before, against the strange sense of danger that had followed her through every corridor of the manor since witnessing that first, brief flicker of open eyes reflected in a mantel mirror. I will help you, she said finally, her voice steadying with resolve. But we must be careful. Lady Seraphina rises early, and her maid attends her chamber shortly after breakfast to prepare her clothing for the day. Then we have a narrow window this very morning, Alastair said, while she remains occupied with her own preparations elsewhere in the house. Elsie nodded, though her hands trembled as she set down the poker and moved toward the door. I will find a reason to enter the guest chamber, perhaps fresh linens, or a message regarding the day's arrangements. I will search the desk while I am there, though I do not know how I shall explain myself if anyone questions why I have opened a locked drawer. Bring me whatever you find, however small it seems, Alastair instructed. And Elsie, if anyone approaches while you search, abandon the task immediately. Your safety matters more to me than any document, regardless of what it might prove. Elsie left the room with a heart pounding harder than it ever had in her 4 months of service at the manor, moving through the corridors with careful, measured steps that betrayed none of the fear churning within her. She found Lady Seraphina occupied in the breakfast room below, engaged in quiet conversation with Charlotte, and used the opportunity to slip into the guest chamber Seraphina had been using, claiming to Mrs. Whitfield that fresh linens needed changing. The writing desk sat near the window, exactly where Alastair had described it, and Elsie approached it with hands that would not quite stop shaking. The drawer was locked, as expected, but a small key rested carelessly atop the desk itself, half hidden beneath a stack of correspondence, as though Seraphina had grown complacent in her sense of security after 4 days without any hint of suspicion from the household. Elsie fitted the key into the lock with trembling fingers, and it turned smoothly, the drawer sliding open to reveal a folded stack of papers bound with ribbon, along with several letters written in an unfamiliar hand she assumed belonged to Nathaniel or Seraphina's uncle. She had only moments to examine what she found before footsteps sounded in the corridor outside. Growing closer with each passing second, she snatched the folded papers and one of the letters from the drawer, closing it quickly and locking it once more, tucking the stolen documents into the folds of her apron just as the door opened and Charlotte stepped into the room. "What are you doing in here?" Charlotte asked, her eyes narrowing with immediate suspicion. "Changing the linens, miss," Elsie answered, forcing her voice into calm steadiness despite the frantic pounding of her heart. "Mrs. Whitfield asked that I attend to it this morning." Charlotte studied her for a long moment, her gaze flickering toward the desk and then back to Elsie's face, searching for some sign of deception. Whatever she saw or failed to see seemed to satisfy her suspicion for the moment. "See that you finish quickly," Charlotte said finally. "Lady Seraphina will want this room prepared properly before the day grows much older." Elsie curtsied and gathered the linen she had brought as pretext, moving quickly from the room the instant Charlotte's attention turned elsewhere, her heart still racing from the narrow escape. She made her way back toward the Duke's chamber by a roundabout path, ensuring no one observed her direct route between the two rooms, and slipped inside once she confirmed the corridor stood empty. "I found these," she whispered, pulling the folded papers and letter from her apron and pressing them into Alistair's waiting hands. "Someone nearly discovered me. Charlotte entered the room while I searched, though I do not believe she suspects anything beyond ordinary household duties." Alistair unfolded the papers with careful, hurried movements, his eyes scanning the contents rapidly. What he found confirmed every suspicion the past 4 days had built within him, laid out in cold, precise legal language that left no room for denial or misinterpretation. An arrangement between Seraphina's uncle and Nathaniel's family, structured around the marriage to secure Ravensworth wealth for the benefit of both families, with clear provisions for how funds would be distributed once the marriage was secured and the estate's resources became accessible. The letter, written in Nathaniel's hand, proved even more damning, containing language that spoke plainly of feelings between himself and Seraphina that extended well beyond the boundaries of a business arrangement. Promises made for a future together, once sufficient time had passed following the wedding to avoid immediate suspicion. "This is everything," Alistair said quietly, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Everything I need to expose this entire scheme, and everything I need to finally end this charade." "What will you do now, Your Grace?" Elsie asked, watching him carefully. Alistair folded the papers again, tucking them beneath his pillow for safekeeping, his mind already turning toward the confrontation he had delayed for 4 long days. "I will wake," he said simply, "today, and Lady Seraphina will learn precisely how much I have heard, and precisely how much proof I now hold in my hands to confirm every word." Elsie nodded, though worry still lined her young face. "Will you tell her of my part in this? I fear what she might do if she learns I helped you." "You have my word," Alistair said, meeting her eyes steadily, "that no harm will come to you for the courage you have shown these past days. Whatever else happens today, your safety and your position within this household remain secure. You have done more for me in a single morning than most could accomplish in a lifetime of loyal service, and I do not forget such things easily." Elsie curtsied once more, though something in her posture had shifted, a quiet pride settling into her shoulders where fear had rested only moments before. She left the room to attend her remaining duties, while Alistair remained behind, staring at the ceiling above his bed, preparing himself for the confrontation that would finally bring 4 days of careful, painful deception to its end. By mid-afternoon, Alistair had made all the arrangements he required. He sent Elsie, discreetly, to summon Henry the butler with instructions to gather the family solicitor from the village, along with a request that Dr. Bennet return once more to the manor before evening. He asked that these arrangements be made quietly, without alerting Lady Seraphina to their purpose, and Elsie carried out each task with a steadiness that surprised even herself, given how her hands had trembled only hours before while searching the locked drawer in the guest chamber. Seraphina spent much of the afternoon in her usual vigil beside the bed, unaware that anything had changed, unaware that the man she believed lost in some mysterious unconsciousness now possessed full knowledge of every scheme she and Nathaniel had constructed together. She read quietly from a book she did not seem to truly follow, glancing periodically toward his still face, and once more, in a quiet moment when she believed herself entirely alone with him, she leaned close and whispered words that confirmed everything Alistair already knew. "I wonder sometimes," she murmured, "whether you would forgive me if you understood the full truth of everything. I have told myself these past days that I am doing what I must for my family, that necessity excuses everything. But necessity does not excuse the way I have come to care for Nathaniel beyond what any arrangement required of me, nor does it excuse the lies I have told you these past 8 months, dressed up as love and devotion. I do not know if such a thing as forgiveness exists for what I have done, Alistair, but I find myself hoping for it regardless. Alistair listened to every word without stirring, storing the confession alongside the documents hidden beneath his pillow, understanding now that when the moment came for confrontation, he would carry not only written proof, but her own spoken admissions as well, repeated so often across these past days that denial would prove impossible regardless of how skillfully she might attempt to construct one. Dr. Bennet arrived just before evening, examining Alistair once more with the same careful attention he had shown throughout the supposed illness, though this time Alistair allowed his eyes to open slowly the moment the doctor's fingers pressed against his wrist. "Your Grace," the doctor said, startled, "you are awake. How do you feel? Can you speak clearly? Do you recall what happened to you?" "I recall everything, doctor," Alistair said, his voice rough from days of careful silence, though steady with purpose. "I require your continued discretion for just a short while longer, and I ask that you remain present for what is about to unfold in this room." Seraphina, who had been standing near the window, spun around at the sound of his voice, her face draining of color as she registered that he was truly, fully awake, speaking clearly, looking directly at her with an expression she had never before seen upon his features. "Alistair," she breathed, moving toward the bed with what appeared to be genuine relief, though Alistair now recognized the practiced quality beneath even her most convincing displays of emotion. "You are awake. Thank goodness. I feared we might never." "How long have I been unconscious, Seraphina?" Alistair interrupted, his voice cold and measured. "Tell me precisely how many days have passed since I collapsed in the garden." "4 days," she answered, confusion beginning to creep into her expression at his tone. "You collapsed on Tuesday, and it is now Saturday evening. We were all so worried, the doctor could not explain." "4 days," Alistair repeated. "4 days in which you visited this chamber at all hours, believing me incapable of hearing or understanding anything spoken in my presence." Seraphina's face went entirely still, the color that had briefly returned draining away once more as understanding began to dawn in her eyes. "What are you saying, Alistair?" "I am saying that I have not been unconscious for a single moment of these 4 days," Alistair said, sitting up fully now, his eyes never leaving her face. "I fell in the garden deliberately, Seraphina. I planned it carefully, rehearsed it until I could perform a collapse convincing enough to fool everyone in this household, including a trained physician. I did this because I had grown suspicious of your true feelings toward our engagement, and I needed to learn the truth in a way that left no room for rehearsed answers or careful performances." The room fell utterly silent. Dr. Bennet stood near the foot of the bed, his expression caught somewhere between shock and dawning comprehension of what he had just witnessed regarding a patient he had genuinely believed to be suffering from a medical condition beyond his understanding. "You cannot mean," Seraphina began, her voice shaking now, "that you have been aware this entire time, that you heard." "Everything," Alistair confirmed, his voice hard as stone. "I heard you whisper to Charlotte about a man named Nathaniel on the very first evening of my supposed collapse. I heard Nathaniel himself, sneaking through the servants' stairwell in the dead of night to speak with you, discussing arrangements and documents and estate matters as though my life were nothing more than a variable in your careful calculations. I heard your confession of debts, of an arrangement forced upon you by your uncle, of feelings for Nathaniel that grew beyond what any business arrangement required. I have heard every word you have spoken in this room these past 4 days, Seraphina, and I have proof beyond mere memory to confirm all of it." He reached beneath his pillow and withdrew the folded documents Elsie had retrieved from the guest chamber, holding them out for Seraphina to see, watching as recognition and horror flooded across her face in equal measure. "Where did you find those?" she whispered, her composure shattering entirely now, all pretense of devoted concern abandoned in the face of undeniable exposure. That matters little now, Alastair said. What matters is that I hold in my hands written proof of an arrangement between your uncle and Nathaniel's family, structured entirely around securing my wealth through our marriage, along with a letter from Nathaniel himself speaking of feelings and promises that extend well beyond any business arrangement. I have your own spoken confessions, repeated across 4 separate days, admitting to everything laid out within these documents. There is no path remaining to you now, Serafina, by which you might deny what has occurred. Serafina sank slowly into the chair she had occupied for 4 sleepless days, her hands trembling as she pressed them against her face, and for a long moment the only sound in the room was her ragged, uneven breathing. I never wanted it to happen this way, she finally said, her voice small and broken. You must believe that much, whatever else you think of me now. When my uncle first proposed the arrangement, I believed I had no choice. Our family's debts had grown severe enough to threaten the loss of everything we possessed, and marrying into your family seemed the only path that might save us. I did not expect to develop genuine feelings for Nathaniel along the way. I did not expect any of this to become as complicated as it has. You expected to deceive me for the rest of our marriage, Alastair said, his voice hard, though something beneath the anger carried a note of genuine sorrow as well. You expected to secure my wealth for your family while carrying on a hidden relationship with another man, all while I remained entirely ignorant of the truth beneath our engagement. I do not know what I expected, Serafina admitted, tears finally spilling down her face. I told myself I could make our marriage work regardless, that necessity and affection might grow to coexist somehow, even with Nathaniel remaining a part of my life in whatever capacity circumstances allowed. I see now how foolish that belief truly was. Henry entered the chamber at that moment, announcing the arrival of the family solicitor, a stern older man named Mr. Ashford who had served the Ravensworth family for decades, and who quickly grasped the gravity of the situation. Once Alastair explained the circumstances and presented the documents Elsie had retrieved that morning. These documents constitute clear evidence of fraudulent intent, Mr. Ashford said after examining the papers carefully. Your Grace, you would be well within your rights to pursue legal consequences against both Lady Serafina's uncle and the young man named within these papers, given the deliberate scheme to defraud your estate through fraudulent marriage arrangements. I have no wish to pursue legal ruin against Serafina herself, Alastair said, his eyes still fixed on the woman weeping quietly in the chair before him. Whatever her failures in honesty, I do not believe she deserves complete destruction for choices made under pressure from her family's circumstances. But the engagement ends tonight, and I want it made clear to her uncle and to Nathaniel that any further attempt to interfere with my estate or reputation will be met with the full consequences the law allows. Understood, Your Grace, Mr. Ashford said, gathering the documents carefully for safekeeping. I will draft the necessary papers to formally dissolve the engagement, and I will ensure word reaches the parties involved that further schemes of this nature will not be tolerated. Serafina rose slowly from the chair, wiping at her tears with a trembling hand, though she made no attempt to argue or plead further, seeming to understand that the moment for such attempts had long since passed. I will gather my belongings and leave the manor tonight, then, if that is your wish. It is, Alastair said quietly. Henry will arrange transportation for you back to your family's estate. I wish you no further ill will beyond the ending of our engagement, Serafina, but I cannot in good conscience continue any relationship built upon such thorough deception. She nodded once, and without further words, gathered what dignity remained to her and left the chamber, her footsteps fading down the corridor as the household began to absorb the sudden, dramatic turn of events that had unfolded within the span of a single evening. Dr. Bennet remained behind briefly, shaking his head with a mixture of admiration and disbelief at the performance Alastair had sustained for 4 full days. I have practiced medicine for over 20 years, Your Grace, and I confess I have never encountered a deception so thorough it fooled my own professional judgment entirely. Your discipline in maintaining such stillness for so long borders on the remarkable." "It was necessity rather than talent, Doctor," Alistair said, finally allowing himself to relax against the pillows, exhaustion from 4 days of careful performance finally beginning to settle over him now that the confrontation had passed. "I hope never to require such a performance again in my lifetime." Once the room had emptied of solicitor and physician alike, Alistair called for Elsie, who arrived quickly, her expression uncertain as she wondered what the confrontation's outcome might mean for her own position within the household. "It is done," Alistair told her simply. "Lady Seraphina has departed, and the truth stands fully exposed. None of this would have been possible without the courage you showed in searching that chamber, Elsie, knowing full well the danger it placed you in." "I only did what seemed right, Your Grace," Elsie said, though pride colored her voice now where fear had dominated it only hours before. "Right is not always easy, and courage is rarely comfortable," Alistair said. "I promised you protection and reward for your assistance, and I intend to honor that promise fully. Effective immediately, you will be elevated to the position of personal attendant within this household, with wages and privileges befitting that role. Additionally, I intend to see that your family, wherever they may reside, receives support sufficient to ensure their comfort and security. As a token of my gratitude for the honesty and bravery you have shown these past days, when so many others in your position might have chosen silence out of fear." Elsie's eyes widened with genuine shock at the generosity of the offer, and for a moment she seemed unable to find words adequate to express her gratitude. "Your Grace, I do not know how to thank you properly for such kindness." "You have already thanked me, Elsie, through the truth you helped bring to light," Alistair said. "In a house full of careful performances and hidden agendas, you proved to be the one person whose honesty never wavered, even when silence might have proven the easier path. That is a rarer quality than you perhaps realize, and one I intend to value highly within my household from this day forward." In the weeks that followed, word of the broken engagement spread quietly through the social circles that mattered most, though the full details of the scheme remained known only to those directly involved, Alistair having chosen discretion over public scandal in handling the aftermath. Seraphina returned to her family's estate, her future uncertain, though free at last from the pretense that had bound her to a marriage built on necessity rather than genuine affection. What became of her relationship with Nathaniel, whether it survived the collapse of their careful scheme or crumbled under the weight of exposure and consequence, remained a matter Alistair chose not to concern himself with further, having closed that chapter of his life with as much finality as circumstances allowed. Elsie settled into her elevated position within the household with a quiet grace that earned respect from staff and family alike, her careful attention and unwavering honesty proving valuable assets in a household that had learned, through painful experience, the true worth of trustworthy service. Alistair, for his part, approached future courtship with far greater caution than before, though the experience had not hardened him entirely against the possibility of genuine affection, only sharpened his ability to recognize the difference between performance and truth. The garden where he had once staged his dramatic collapse became, in time, simply a garden once more, the roses blooming each season without memory of the deception once played out among their thorns. But within the manor's walls, the story of the Duke who feigned unconsciousness to uncover his fiancée's true heart, and the young maid whose courage brought the truth fully into the light, remained a quiet legend among the household staff, told in hushed voices during long winter evenings, a reminder that truth, however carefully hidden, has a way of finding the light eventually, and that courage, however small it may seem in the moment, can alter the course of lives far beyond what the courageous ever expect to accomplish.